All right, we're going to give one more minute just to make sure we get our live stream coordinated here. All right. Hold on, I'm just watching to make sure my team is ready to go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this for this incredible day at Northwestern. My name is John Yates. I'm the Vice President for Global Marketing and Communications at Northwestern. Today you're going to hear from our President, Henry Beenan, Adrian Randolph, our Dean of the Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences, and finally from our Nobel Prize winner in Economic Sciences, Joel Mokyr. That's right. After brief comments, Professor Mokyr will then take some questions from the media in attendance, and we also have some questions that media who could not attend but are watching on the live stream submitted in advance. So I'll be asking him those questions as well. So I think we'll just get this started. I'm going to first welcome up President Beenan to say a couple words. So President Henry Beenan, you want to join us up here?
Thank you, John. Well, today it's a great day for my friend Joel Mokyr and for Northwestern. We recognize Joel Mokyr on this remarkable achievement of the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. Because Joel is an economic historian, he will remember that we shared a line or a file in the old gym where we had lockers next to each other. So I know him pretty well from that. But seriously speaking, Joel, on behalf of Northwestern's faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends across the globe, we congratulate you and we thank you for demonstrating this university's greatness on the world stage. And I congratulate all your colleagues in economics and in history. At Northwestern, we often talk about interdisciplinary work as a cornerstone of our strength, and Professor Mokyr reflects that strength with the research that brings together economics, history, science, and technology. Northwestern is one of the world's most preeminent universities precisely because of our brilliant faculty, like Professor Mokyr. And they push the boundaries of research in their quest to improve the human experience. Professor Mokyr's research focuses on innovation and growth and the important role that science plays in the advancement of our society. Importantly, his research also highlights the need for society to be open to change. These are themes that resonate deeply as institutions across the country, including ours, work to demonstrate the value of our research, not only to our elected officials, but to each and every member of the public. Today, we reflect on the important factors that lead to prosperity and how we may apply them moving forward. Many congratulations are in order. We once again congratulate Professor Mokyr. We also congratulate his fellow prize winners, Professor Aguillon, Philippe Aguillon, and Peter Howard. We congratulate his colleagues in the Department of Economics and the Department of History. We congratulate the College of Arts and Sciences, including Dean Adrian Randolph, who will be here in a moment. And we congratulate everybody, every faculty member, postdoctoral researcher, staff member, and student who contributes to this amazing academic community where research thrives and where students have a front row seat in history. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Adrian Randolph, Dean of Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences, and for those of us fortunate enough to know Joel Mokyr, we know what a gem he is. And I hope many more will find out about him in the days to come, owing to this extraordinary recognition. Joel is a remarkable scholar, teacher, and human. It really is gratifying to see him named Nobel Prize winner in economic sciences in 2025. It is fully deserved. Joel arrived, as I'm sure you can read, but I'll just recap, at Northwestern in 1974 and quickly rose through the ranks and was named in 1994 the Robert H. Strotz Professor. He's a proud member of both our top-ranked economics department and our top-ranked history department. He is, moreover, co-director of the Center for Economic History. He is the author of scores of books. I can't possibly name them all, but to give you a taste of the range of his topics that he covers, his books, here are a sampling: Industrialization in the Low Countries, Economics of the Industrial Revolution, The Lever of Riches, Technological Creativity and Economic Progress, The Gifts of Athena, Historical Origins of the Knowledge Economy, and A Culture of Growth, Origins of the Modern Economy. Prolific and influential, Mokyr, his ideas have circulated globally. Comfortable in the worlds of Renaissance humanism and in the early modern Republic of Letters in the 15th and 16th century, in the scientific revolutions of the 17th century, and in the sometimes hot-headed debates of the Enlightenment and Romanticism, the 18th and 19th centuries, Mokyr mingles a deep commitment to intellectual history with the histories of science, technology, and markets associated with the long industrial revolution. Rather than trying to sum up Professor Mokyr's scholarship, let me just offer one citation, which I think, or quotation, which really captures some of the spirit of his work. I'll just set the scene. The book, A Culture of Growth, charts the intricate web of ideas and experts connecting fundamental discoveries in science and technology to the development of our modern economy. Supporting this thesis is a remarkable skein of cultural threads drawn from well-known and very little-known sources. He links path-blazing experts educated in the new discoveries of fundamental science to what he calls tweakers and tinkerers, who spread knowledge and technical skill across Europe and the world. Among Mokyr's key insights is this visionary and topical claim, quote, "The liberal ideas of religious tolerance, free entry into the market for ideas, and belief in the transnational character of the intellectual community were essential to Enlightenment thought. These were the cultural underpinnings that not only supported a functioning market for ideas, that is, a market in which innovators had a fair chance to persuade their audiences, they also actively encouraged intellectual innovation and thus laid the foundation for the emergence of the modern economy." Joel reminds us that cultural commitments to tolerance, to academic freedom, and to internationalism are the preconditions of our economy. These values are upheld within institutions like our university, which depends on pluralism and rationality, are the building blocks for many of the advances that stream through successful markets and societies. And these values are worth underscoring as we celebrate today our colleague and friend, Joel Mokyr. Joel.
Well, as you might all imagine, I'm still a little bit dazed by, what transpired today. But I want to start with something completely unrelated to this prize, and that is that this is a very special day for me, seeing the return of 20 live hostages of my countrymen this morning, which warms my heart far more than any other personal achievement that I can ever get. So it was this morning when I got up early and I dashed off to my laptop to check whether these hostages had been returned. And then I noticed in my email that there were all these messages of congratulations, and I go, what are they congratulating me for? And I thought it was maybe people mistaken my birthday or something, but no, I mean, there was a missed call with a country code of 42, which is Sweden, and then all of a sudden something started to dawn on me. Still trying to digest this. It'll probably take, a couple of weeks. So, as Henry and Adrian said, I'm an economic historian. I've been an economic historian at Northwestern for 51 years now. I'm starting my 52nd. Still going strong. And I have been a proud member of two of not just the university's most distinguished department, but the world's most distinguished departments, the economics department and the history department, of which I'm in both of them a full citizen. Being in those two departments is quite interesting, in part because the two cultures are essentially non-overlapping, and in history and in Harris Hall, it's a very different world than when you're in the Kellogg building. Different language, different people, but they share a commitment to scholarship and to teaching second to none. And I've been very proud to be a member of both of those departments. Although, as I said, it does lead to some interesting situations. I think there was a time when I was simultaneously the most left-wing member of the economics department and the most right-wing member of the history department, which is still possible. So having been here for, as I said, over 50 years, of course, both departments changed over time. Many colleagues left and passed on, and new colleagues joined. But I think the commitment to scholarship and to true intellectual activity has remained constant over time, and if anything, has improved. And one of the joys of my life here has been not just those books that Henry talked about, you write them because what else is there to do, but training graduate students. And over these years, I have a large number of brilliant graduate students in economics and in history, and many of them today, I'm proud to say, occupy positions in some of the best universities in the country. Some of them have their own students, and these students have their students. So I have actually intellectual great-grandchildren, which is kind of a bit of an awesome feeling. And some of my students, former students, actually are retiring. So the news for you, Adrian, is no way I'm going to go retire. Okay, so no, don't worry. Even if my students are retiring, not me. All right, so I'm not going to talk a lot about economic history here because, it will get boring and technical, but I do want to make 1 or 2 points that I think are worth thinking about. In 1994, the Nobel Committee awarded for the first time a Nobel Prize to 2 economic historians, Robert Vogel and Douglas North. I still remember very well the morning when the news came. I had a graduate student at Washington University where Doug taught, and he called me and said, "Joel, did you hear that Vogel and North won the Nobel Prize?" And I had tears in my eyes of excitement, because this was us. This was us, the tribe of economic historians, being recognized by the economics profession in a way that we didn't really feel possible. Since then, more economic historians have received the Nobel Prize, although somehow the Nobel Committee managed to dress it up as if it was for something else. So Claudia Golden at Harvard got it for her work on gender economics, but of course Claudia is a 100% economic historian. She and I came on the scene almost at the same time. So slightly younger are the people who got it last year, Daron Acemoglu and Jim Robinson, both of whom got it for work they did in economic history. Also, if you knew Daron Acemoglu, you realize he's active in another 12 fields in economics. But that's what they got the prize for. So I want to cite 2 things that I learned from those Nobel Prize winners and explore its meaning just for a second. Bob Vogel said to me once, Joel, economics must deal with economic history. He says, for economics to work without economic history is like an evolutionary biologist without paleontology. And if you don't have paleontology, you just miss 99.5% of all the species that ever walked this earth. And so I teach economic history in some sense, keeping that in mind, that we can observe in the past economic systems, economic societies, economic interactions that we don't have anymore. Some of them just as well, formal slave markets, feudalism, a whole bunch of other sort of things that have disappeared from this earth, and we're not sorry about to leave. But if we don't study those, okay, we're really missing a great deal of what economics can teach us. And so that's what I spend my life doing. Doug, who was a very close personal friend, once said to me, and went along, Doug was Mr. Institutions. He talked about, whatever it was that he was thinking about, institutions always somehow came up. And he said to me once, and I'll keep citing that line because it's really meaningful. He said, Joel, there's a good reason why we economic historians speak of technological progress, but institutional change. And he said, you know, the reason is very simple. Technology really, by and large, advances and has an upward trend in large parts because it's cumulative, right? So we know what the people before us knew, but they don't know what we know. So we always know more, and so our technology is getting better. You know, one could argue with that on the fringes, but you know, as a first approximation, it's not bad. But institutions, he says, there's no such trend. There is no way that we can show that they get better over time. They do go up, they do go down. I mean, there's periods in which institutions all over the world were getting remarkably worse, particularly the interwar period in the 20th century, say, and they get better in the years after 1945, and then again after maybe 1989-90, but it has subsequently, they will come down again, and it seems that there's some evidence to show that that's what's happening today. That's, I think, an extremely important lesson from economic history, because as technology gives us more power over nature and more ways, you know, to achieve our goals and to harness the forces of nature to our goals, if the institutions are bad, and by institutions North meant, and I think most of us mean, essentially the rules of the game in economics and in politics. And if institutions get worse while technology gets better, the outcome can be quite devastating to the people. And so that's sort of, once you think about it, it's kind of obvious, right? So, you know, you make a hammer, you build a technological tool. You know, it can be used to build a home, and it can be used to bash, you know, Abel and Cain's heads in. That's, I think, something that's true across the board for technological change throughout the ages. Gunpowder can be used to fight wars, and it can be used to build tunnels. And I think the same is true for the things that are on the horizon today, including artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and so on and so forth. So there's some, I'm an optimist, and I've always been an optimist, as my colleague Bob Gordon, who's been here since I've been, and we've had many interesting conversations about this. So, but I think we should always keep in mind that technology can be abused, but that by and large it is still true that if you had to choose a year in human history in which you wanted to be born, I would choose 1925, because I still think that our capability of creating techniques that make our lives better, more comfortable, longer, reduce disease, reduce mortality, keeps us cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and make sure that we eat well, that those techniques will continue to improve. And insofar that things go wrong, and unfortunately there are still famines in this world, and there's still people not getting an education, it is not the fault of technology. It is the fault of our institutions that haven't been getting better. Now there is, before I quit this, there's something I do want to point out, and that is there is a literature today that basically says, you know, we really should stop innovation. You know, growth is bad. You know, this whole anti-growth thing, all it's, you know, it's done, it's brought misery on this world. You know, my late colleague in the history department, a brilliant historian called David Joravsky, whom I love dearly. But David once yelled at me and says, what is all this talk about technological progress? It's not getting better, you know. Life in cities was terrible, you know. People were, the cities were dirty and smoky, you know. And, you know, my point is, David, and I said this to him, David, you want one number to show you how things are getting better. Look at infant mortality statistics and see how much better our life is than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Now, that said, the human race faces two of the greatest challenges that it has ever faced. And these things, have no real precedent. So history is not a very good guide here. But it's something that we have to face and we have to think about with the tools that history provides us, even if history itself doesn't give you an answer. And those are climate change and the demographic change. And they're very different in their nature and they're very different in the solutions. But given that the only way in which we can cope with these crises is inventing ourselves out of it, I strongly urge the world to keep putting efforts and money and resources and incentives to the people who are trying to invent us out of these two crises. And I think if we achieve that, I think technology will have fulfilled its role. Now, this is not an uncontroversial point, but I think there seems to be almost no other way of dealing with it. And so I wanted to say, seeing everybody here and the many emails that I've gotten, I have, as we call it in economics, have enough warm glow to contribute marginally to climate change. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to, yeah. All right. Thank you, Professor Mokyr. We're going to take some questions now from the audience and from the media. Do you want to go back up here? And I'll distribute these microphones to my team over here. If there are folks in the audience, I do have some questions from the media who sent them in ahead of time as well. Do we have anyone who's got some questions for Professor Mokyr? Nobody? If not, then I will read from the questions that were submitted ahead of time. All right, we'll try a couple of these real quick. All right. So the first question comes from, I'm just going to sit over here so we're closer together. The first question comes from an outlet in South Korea called eDaily. And the question is, South Korea has experienced rapid technological advancement and industrial growth, yet faces slowing productivity and structural rigidity. From your research on historical roots of innovation and sustained growth, what lessons do you think countries like Korea can take to ensure that innovation continues to translate into long-term prosperity?
Yeah, I must say, I find it slightly ironic that this question comes to me from South Korea, because in my lecture about institutions, I always contrast, as it's almost inevitable, South Korea with North Korea to exemplify the fact that if you have reasonably good institutions, you do a heck of a lot better than if you have lousy institutions, as they do in Pyongyang. I mean, that seems kind of obvious, and I think Acemoglu and Robinson made this point, and everybody makes this point. And so to worry about the South Korean problems, given that it is a wealthy, peaceful country that has miraculously pulled itself up from very low income per capita in the 1950s to one of the wealthier nations in the world today, strikes me as sort of I mean, if you worry about South Korea, what do you think about North Korea? What do you think about, other countries, Myanmar, countries like that? Those are the countries I worry about. South Korea should continue to do what it has been doing all these times. It should make sure its borders are open, that it is tapped into the best practice technologies of this world, and they should have more babies. That, I think, is the one concern that's causing, some kind of stagnation in South Korea. I think they have one of the lowest birth rates on this planet. I mean, maybe this is a choice that they made. And I think there's another question here about fertility. We can come back to that. But in terms of technological innovation, I mean, some people here in the audience must be driving a Korean-made car. And I don't think that they would feel very much inclined to think of these Korean-made cars as an example of bad technology. If you want an example of bad technology, look at the cars that were made in the Eastern Europe. before it collapsed. And, you know, if you ever wanted to see a really bad car, you should try a Trabant, which is now a museum piece. Now, South Korea doesn't make Trabants. They make cars that run and run and run. So to say that I'm really, in all due respect, I'm really worried about their economic future. Many other countries on this planet would like to trade places with them.
That's great. A follow-up question from the same outlet. How important do you believe openness and the free exchange of knowledge are for sustaining growth in an era of growing geopolitical and technological fragmentation?
Well, I'm a great fan of the free exchange of knowledge. I'm also a great fan of the free exchange of anything else, including goods and services. So my big advice to countries like that is stay open and keep the country not only open in terms of its boundaries, but of the freedom of its people to say what they want, to have a free press, to have free elections. South Korea has had a reasonably successful democracy. I mean, nobody has a perfect democracy. We should know that by now. But South Korea has made the transition to democracy. And yeah, so when you make that transition to democracy and to a free society, you realize that Churchill was right in his famous cliche about democracy being the worst of all systems except for all the others. And South Korea has its warts and its trouble, and follow the news, and you realize that it doesn't always get the best people to become politicians. But it is a successful country. Now they are located in an awkward part of the world, of course, because they are a small country right to a very big other country, and that always is a tricky situation to be. I mean, I studied Ireland in my younger days, and that was a small country right next to a bigger country, and it didn't always work very well for them. Korea has been able, thanks in part through American support, to pull itself up from its poverty. We're talking about the southern part here, not the northern part. And I think they should. I see no particular reason why that can't continue, except for the sort of threat of demography, which I talked about.
All right, the next question comes from the outlet Die Zeit in Hamburg, Germany. The question is, do you believe that the exploration of history should play a larger role in economics, and how could this be achieved?
Well, it is already playing a larger role in economics. I'm proud to say that here at Northwestern we have 7 scholars who are basically full-time economic historians on the faculty, and then a number of people around who still work in the field and hang around, like my friend Lou Kane in the audience there. It is becoming a very popular field in economics, and it's not just that we have more and more interest in the past, but I think there are other things about economic history that make it attractive. Economics in my lifetime, which is a long time, has changed in the following sense. Theory is still very much an important part of our field, but I think by and large the center of gravity has shifted from theoretical work to empirical work, and to big data, some smaller data, but empirical work has gotten much more, I think, respect than it did 40 and 50 years ago. Now, economic history, of course, is by its very nature an empirical field, but it also has been, I think, exceptionally been able to take advantage of new data collection and data generation techniques that are coming online and are getting better every year. And so the fact that both graduate students and young faculty are flowing to economic history is, I think, a sign of the times, not only in that people are interested in the past, which I sincerely hope they do, but also because the options of generating and collecting data that weren't available before are coming online. And nobody has done more to create that than my colleague Joe Ferry, who's sitting in the back. And Joe essentially was one of the first pioneers in using very large samples of data taken from the full count American censuses in order to study American mobility and many other aspects that require large data sets. So I think economic history has a bright future, and I am imploring all major economics departments that do not have a full-time economic historian in their ranks. I won't name them by name, but Princeton and Penn are among them, to hire a young economic historian, which we are producing every year, and we have 3 of them on the market this year, and I will do all I can to persuade these universities to hire my students.
Excellent. All right, the next question comes from the Associated Press. You have often spoken positively about technological innovation. How are you feeling about AI, which, as you know, has sparked concerns about everything from the elimination of jobs to darker scenarios like whether it could develop deadly viruses?
Well, my day wouldn't be complete if I didn't have a question about AI. I think wherever I go, people ask me questions about AI. It's a tool. The notion that somehow AI is this monstrosity that lurks, somewhere beneath us and will eventually come and, drive the human race into extinction and take over the planet. I mean, these people have read too much dystopian science fiction. Nothing of the sort is ever going to happen. In fact, the whole idea that machines are more intelligent than we are seems to assume that intelligence is a single metric in which we sort of measure a machine's IQ and compare it to. I mean, that's complete nonsense. I mean, of course, human intelligence is multidimensional, and it's always been the case that we use machines to do things that we can't do ourselves because our senses and the size of our brain aren't good enough. Okay, so we can't see bacteria either. So we build a microscope and we see bacteria. We can't see the planets of Jupiter, the moons of Jupiter. So we build a telescope and we see them. We can't do zillions of calculations in a second, so we have high-powered computers. That doesn't make the computer more intelligent. It just means that in a particular dimension, they can do things that we can't. AI is an information aggregator. Okay? It knows what we fed it, and it has access. At very high speed, it can process it in ways that we tell it to do. But the notion that they have human intelligence that includes initiative and intuition and ambition and things like that seems to be really fanciful. And that's not, I think, what's on the near horizon. I mean, who knows what's going to happen 50 years from now. But at the moment, I see AI primarily as a magnificent research assistant. And we've had previous research. My PC is a wonderful research assistant. For many people doing research, we have other new tools that have come online, much more powerful microscopes, lasers, all kinds of things that we use to do research. And one lesson that you could take away from the scientific revolution of the 17th century is that science advances when the tools that are at the disposal of researchers are getting better. And that's basically Galileo and his telescope and Hooke and his microscope coming up with new insight because they had better tools. AI is another powerful tool, and everybody in this room, unless I'm terribly mistaken, is using it in some way, and I'm as guilty as the next guy. It's not thinking for me. It's just, giving access to information much faster than I need it. Sometimes the wrong information, but you got to be careful. But I don't see AI as a threat to humanity. Now, what will its effect be on the labor market? And there's 200 years of history in which people have been predicting that machines would kick us all out of a job and turn us into this sort of reserve army of the unemployed, as Marx famously called it. And though a decade ago, wrote an article for the Journal of Economic Literature with 2 former students, pointing out that, so this prediction was made over and over and over again. There's actually very few instances of long-term technological unemployment, in which people are being thrown out of work and that they're just sitting there, you know, dazed on the streets without ever having a job. It is true, of course, that as technology advances, some occupations and some tasks become mechanized. And usually these people find other jobs. Now, there's friction there, and for some people this may be difficult. But I'll give you one example of my own experience here at Northwestern that will illustrate this. When I came here in 1974, I was assigned a secretary. And what the secretary did was basically type. So I would give her a manuscript, and she would type it up, and then I would fix it, and she would put, you know, these white out and these sort of white tapes in which she corrected it. And then we would go through 4 or 5 iterations of like that. And by the time we were done, it was a total mess, but it was typed, and you could send it to a journal. And then one day, word processing came around. And, you know, we were told, oh, the secretaries will do no more typing. You're going to do your own typing. And so, fine. So what happened to the secretaries? And it turns out the secretaries, instead of becoming typists, became organizers. They run things. They talk to students. And, you know, I'll tell you, a world in which the professors type and the secretaries talk to students is better for the professors, for the secretaries, and for the students. And so, in a way, you know, we have about as many secretaries in economics now as we had at the time, but I would never even imagine to ask one of them to do any of my typing. Instead, they run things for us. They organize things for us. You know, and, you know, my sense is that probably much more interesting and challenging for them. I think that kind of phenomenon is true across the labor force. Machines don't replace us. They move us to more interesting, more challenging work. And as AI moves us up to take these jobs over, people will move to even higher jobs. So it's worth pointing out, perhaps, and this is an argument made in great detail by last year's Nobel Prize winner, Daron Acemoglu. He said, you know, technological change not only replaces people, it creates new tasks. And I told him, you know, we were talking about this paper, I said, you know, my grandmother, you know, in 1910 was to be told that her great-grandchildren would be video game programmers and cybersecurity experts. She wouldn't have the foggiest idea what we're talking about. What kind of jobs are these? And I think just as that was the case, I think it's true today. We cannot imagine the new tasks and jobs that will be necessary to fill for people in the future. But for just to make the final point, as I see it, the main concern about the labor market is not technological unemployment, it's labor scarcity. That fewer and fewer people entering the labor force, more and more people are retiring, and there's this, you know, age hollowing out in the sense that the people supposed to pay their taxes and their Social Security are disappearing. And the people who receive Social Security, such as myself, their numbers are multiplying. So for that, you need some kind of mechanism that will do the work. And if demography won't do it, then technology will have to do it. So my sense is that you know, insight from history is quite, I think, important. Now, I can't rule out some dystopian outcome, you know, like in this famous Kurt Vonnegut novel that I read in graduate school called Player Piano. It's a brilliant book, and he sort of describes this world in which basically nobody's working anymore. You can't rule that out because, you know, who knows what the future will bring. But John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, once described a world called, it's a little essay called Economic Prospects for Our Grandchildren, in which he talked about a 15-hour work week. Well, I'm still waiting for that one.
Yes. So we probably have time for one more. If there's anyone in the crowd, I do have another one on my phone, which I left over on the other seat. So I'm going to get that. Well, offer one more opportunity for anyone who's here. Okay, we do have one. All right. And if you could speak up as you ask, it's a little harder to hear up here. All right, Deborah?
Sure. Hi, Joel. Congratulations. I'm very curious about what your solution to the demographic crisis is, because I know that yours is different from Elon Musk's.
Here, Joel.
Did you hear it? Yeah.
Could you repeat the question, Deborah?
My curiosity is, don't fall off the edge of the stage. My curiosity is, what is your solution for the demographic crisis? And I was joking that your solution is surely different from Elon Musk's.
Deborah,
In other words, let me just put a point.
I was told by the authorities in my residence not to stay away from politics as much as I can. And I already said to somebody who interviewed me on the phone today that when I heard Richard Nixon resign, I thought I would never imagine a worse president possible. And I've had second thoughts about that one. But that's as far as I'll say about politics. But look, I mean, there is, I think, a concern, which is not new either, because we've seen the same thing, in the Gilded Age, that, extraordinarily rich people will have undue influence on the political process. And that is the nature of a democratic capitalist country.
Oh, no. I'm asking about the demographic crisis, and how you conceive of the solution to the demographic crisis.
Well, the solution to the demographics, that's a really tough one, because this is not a matter of policy. It's a matter of individual decision makers who have decided to have smaller families and who are capable of controlling their fertility. It is not an American phenomenon. It's a worldwide phenomenon. And so I know there is a movement called natalism, which is trying to encourage people to have more babies. And I'm not actually persuaded, as an economist, that actually will make us better off. If it is, assuming that the decisions are being made by people with good control over their fertility, I can't see why I, as a policymaker, or anybody else, should think of a society in which the average family size is one child rather than 3 or 4. Why that would be a worse society? Remember, the world has grown enormously demographically since 1945. In 1950, we had about half the population we have now. Wasn't all that terrible. In fact, everybody was really scared about some kind of Malthusian explosion of population. So if we're going to go from 8 billion to 6 billion, will the planet really get worse? I mean, it's hard to think so. I don't think we'll ever get to a stage in which demographic behavior will lead us to extinction. But I do, so this is a debate I'm having with some fairly learned colleagues who are worried about that. I know of no theory in economics that says what is the optimal population of the world, or even the optimal population of any specific country. What I do think is that the distribution of population over the world today may not be optimal, and that the fact that you should really allow people across the world to move if they want to move. The notion that somehow the United States is full or Canada is full is risible, right? I mean, countries aren't full. I lived in Israel for years. It's very crowded. People manage. There's bigger traffic jams, but then so what? I was born in the Netherlands, even more crowded. Okay. And then you can go and live in a country which is very large and underpopulated. So I mean, does that make a country good or bad? I mean, is Canada, relative to its surface, is a very small population. Doesn't seem to have affected quality of life in Canada. So I don't actually think that the demographic problem is an existential one. Where it gets to be existential is that in the transition from a larger to a smaller population, the age distribution changes. And when the age distribution changes, you may have a problem of the actuarial nature of the social security system, which is what every country is facing. And I just heard today on the radio that Macron's biggest achievement was to raise the age of retirement in France, which they are now trying to undo. But that is the kind of change that we can adjustment that we can make when the population changes and when there's too many old guys around and too few people working. That, I think, is a fair criticism. But I must say, a world that has half the population that it is today doesn't scare me.
Watch out for this right here.
Oh,
yeah. All right, I think I'm going to bring Dean Randolph back up here for a quick toast, if that's all right. Yeah. All right.
Could I invite Jeff Ely, Chair of the Department of Economics, and Kevin Boyle, Chair of the Department of History, and Margalit, I don't know where she is, up to the stage. And we will have a toast. Oh, celebratory. Come on in. Yeah. And then why don't you come in here? Maybe I'll get, I think you'll have to cluster. So maybe I'll start speaking. Joel, as we charge our flutes with bubbly, on behalf of the President, your colleagues, Weinberg College, we just want to express our extraordinary pride in your achievement. I hope that in the coming days that you revel in reflecting on your career and thinking back to all the people who have made this possible. And I understand, I think you'd be the first to acknowledge, as you did, it's the students, the colleagues at other institutions that sustain the type of work you've produced throughout your career and is being recognized today. We could not be happier that it happened to such a wonderful colleague and friend as you. And again, speaking for your departments, congratulations. And we have a tradition in Weinberg College, which I hope you will indulge me with, where we raise our glasses and have 3 cheers. So hip hip, hooray. Hip hip, hooray. Hip hip, hooray. To Joel Mokyr. So thank you all for coming. With that, that is the end of the formal ceremony. Thank you very much. Now some pictures. I want some pictures. Sure, bring anyone up. Yeah. Oh, do you want? Yeah, absolutely.
For the folks from Northwestern that want to come up and share in some of the bubbly, we have lots of bubbly, so feel free to come on up and join us.
That was good.